Gregor's message to the miners, go back to work, I won't give in. But Scargill says we fight on.
The last financial year, South Wales only received £13 million between the 28 collieries.
New birth of leadership in Britain, and that is the most important thing.
More than half of Britain's 180,000 miners have now stopped work because of the National Union of Mine Workers' strike against Bid 2.
The award-winning photographer Roger Tiley was 24 years old when the South Wales miners walked out on strike in 1984. His photographs were published around the world and became some of the defining images of the...
And witnessing it close up was Roger Tiley, then a young press photographer whose subjects emerged from the pits to take on the state.
March 1984. The mines and communities across South Wales were about to be transformed forever. The year-long strike that followed was bitter and brutal. A young photographer from the Gwent Valleys captured every angle of the dispute, not from afar, but up close.
It sucked him down, it sucked him in. Day or night, it was black as sin down that deep, dark, dirty hole. It gave him life.
My name is Roger Tiley, and I've been a documentary photographer since the early 1980s. Over the past 18 months, I've been revisiting former miners and their families I photographed 30 years ago to make new photographs.
And I can still hear him say, we dug too close to hell today. And I can still hear him say...
This is a story that is very personal to me. I was born and brought up in the South Wales valleys, and indeed still live in the valleys. Coal mining was a way of life to many, but I could never imagine what I was about to witness during the next 12 months back in 1984. I had already visited pits to photograph prior to the strike. The friendships I carved with miners at the various pits were to extend when I subsequently visited picket lines, soup kitchens, and numerous rallies and demonstrations to take photographs. The strike proved to be a long battle to protect and save pits from closure, and I recall at the beginning the atmosphere being defiant and miners standing as one to fight to the end for their pits to stay open. This is a story of my journey across the valleys to recollect the memories of the coal industry and the people of the communities whose lives centred on working in the pits. I'm travelling to Newbridge in the Gwent Valleys, where there were two collieries close by, the Clenna South and the Clenna North. Just left my parents in Cross Keys where I had a nice cup of tea or two and a nice lunch, and it's a beautiful day. And I'm going up to see Dot in Newbridge. She was a miner's wife and she was very active during the miners' strike, and she's a lovely lady. I've met her previously and I'm looking forward to speaking to her. It'll bring back a lot of memories. Hello, Dot. How are you?
All right, love, and you?
Good, thank you.
Is this a surprise?
The Newbridge Memorial Hall, usually a place of entertainment and relaxation, became the nerve centre during the strike in this community.
Well, when the strike started, we had letters asking the women to go to a meeting, actually, first of all in the memo, because they made that the strike centre, and asked us to go around pushing leaflets through the door, requesting donations and support, and then go back in a couple of days and collect whatever people were willing to give. But that didn't last, because people actually did come to the memo themselves. Being in the centre of the village, it was very convenient. From there, we were asked, because the donations that we were given from the men going away to picket we had a lot of corned beef and tin stuff given us. So we were using the kitchen in the memo, and we were asked to go in on a Saturday morning and make pasties for the men going away picketing. Well, how it got the way it was, I don't know, because we ended up going, it started so small and grew so big I couldn't believe it, you know, how it went.
I brought some photos to show you, Dot, and these were taken in the memo during the strike.
That's my husband. Well, my husband died, as I told you, 2 years after the strike. Is Alan?
Yeah, Alan hasn't changed that much.
No.
He's still the same. When I was taking photos and it was coming up to Christmas time, it was very difficult for the miners and their families at that time. But in saying that, I could see the support you had from all parts of the country and indeed all parts of the world.
We had a Christmas party and we're hoping to do Christmas party for the children, which we did do. We did the one 5 to 11 and then 11 to 16. We did a disco for them separately.
I was interested to know what Dot's thoughts were 30 years on.
The miners' strike was an experience that I wouldn't have missed for the world, because on a personal level, apart from anything else, it was a real learning curve. I can't believe how naive I was about the world and everything in it before that.
Thank you so much, Dot, for your
That's
time.
all right,
It's been
love.
absolutely fantastic speaking to you.
Well, you're welcome, Roger. You come any time. You're welcome. Come in and have a cup of tea whenever you're around.
Oh, thank you so much, Dot.
Yeah.
Alan Sandell was a union official at the Calenna North Colliery. I photographed him during the winter of the strike as we travelled to Abertillery to collect food parcels.
We also put out 5,000 chickens, 5,000 chocolate loaves.
The year itself was hard and we struggled and we didn't have a lot of food and we had no money. So those things would imply that it's not the best days of my life. But the best days of my life was because of the women that got involved, especially my wife. She went away speaking at different venues. She went with Skinner, the MP, and the nurses coming out and down in Cardiff when we down there, they clapping us into the fields and all that. And the community itself was fantastic. But you experienced when you were in need. And when we were in need, we had the help.
As we know, Alan, the strike lasted for a whole year. But what was the worst part, in your opinion, for you and your family?
Well, not being able to give your children the Christmas that they would like, and not being able to buy them the birthday things they would like. I think we could have won the strike if the likes of Nottingham hadn't gone back. The coal reserves were exaggerated, and I think if they hadn't gone back, the lights would have gone out, industry would have stopped, and we could have come to some sensible agreement at the end of the day with the government. Met up with a couple having work done around the house and one thing and another, and I'm quite surprised how many people, younger lads, have gone into professions. Like there's a chiropodist, and there's a builder, there's a chap making windows, and like I say, it's gratifying to hear that there is a life after the pits.
I'm here on the former site, the North Calenna Colliery, where Alan and many other miners used to work back 30 years ago. And it's pretty much overgrown now. There is a factory which is on part of the site, the old North Colliery, and obviously that brings employment, which is really important to this area. I caught up with Terry Phillips, who wrote the song Deep Dark Dirty Hole. It's a song about his late father, who worked at the Calenna North Colliery.
Sucked him down, it sucked him in. Day or night, it was black as sin down that deep dark dirty hole. It gave him light, it gave him heat. When my father used to bring me up, when he used to pay, collect his pay, he used to come along, used to come through the tunnel, and we come through the buildings, brick buildings that were around here at the time, and it was a hustle and bustle that was going on, because the pit never closed. It was in constant motion all the time, constant activity. And to see nature reclaiming all this back is, bittersweet. It never crossed my mind that, he could go to work and not come back. It never crossed my mind. And it was only later when I was, in my teens and late teens that I actually suddenly it began to dawn on me the work that they were doing was so dangerous and could have such a either debilitating effect on the miners' lives, or it could actually be fatal for them.
We stood on the old former site of North Glennon, and this is really the result of the miners' strike, the effect that the government had to close the pits. What's your feelings now 30 years on?
The valley has definitely changed because the pits have gone, because the sense of community isn't there. It certainly isn't there, because people have to travel out of the community to work elsewhere. For example, I'm a Newbridge boy, but I haven't lived in Newbridge for years because I had to move away to work, and then when I came back I couldn't secure work here, so I've had to move, and I've worked for years and years in Cardiff, but I've lived in the valleys. And I think, we can't have rose-tinted glasses about it all the time. There were, certainly really hard times and harsh times when we had the steelworks and the mines. Definitely hard times and not such good things about those environments, and those working environments as well, because they certainly took their toll on the actual men who did the work, with industrial diseases, pneumoconiosis, the dangers of the work that they faced.
He followed his father, he followed his brother. He made damn sure there'd be no other down that deep, dark, dirty hole. He made the most of meager means, but gave his children brighter dreams than that deep, dark.
During my journey, I think it's important not to forget the terrible disasters that took place in the South Wales coalfield. Well, I've now arrived at Six Bells, where I'm walking towards the monument, the statue of the miner, which commemorates a disaster back in 1960 with 45 men lost their lives underground. It's an absolutely amazing sight. On the plinth there's some names. This memorial is dedicated to all the miners who lost their lives on the 28th of June 1960 at the Six Bells Colliery, and to the coal mining communities everywhere. In 1969, 3 years after the Aberfan disaster, Ralph Jones began his career underground at the Merthyr Vale Colliery. We met at the Dowlais Rugby Club and I talked to him about the year-long miner strike. What was the feeling like in the area of Merthyr Vale and Aberfan?
We had a lot of support in Merthyr Vale and on the area. We was given food parcels. I remember on the Christmas time, we was given turkeys. I had one from a local pub I was going to, and one from one of the clubs. I know we had decent support in the valleys. You had the odd one or two, but support in the valleys was absolutely tremendous. And our families, good support from families. Without them, we wouldn't have managed.
Did it ever cross your mind to go back to work before the strike finished?
No. As I think about 5. I went through picket lines in Merthyr Vale. No, never ever. Because I'm looking now, well, you see someone now and you just won't talk to them.
You still won't talk to them?
I won't talk to them, no. Never ever talk to them. No. And there's a lot of boys that have got the same attitude. Never ever talk to them.
What do you think happened to the community once the pit closed?
You sort of found that there's a lot of jobs went. And there's a lot of knock-on effects, like shops and things. And particularly in Merthyr, when Hoover shut down a few years later, the 2 biggest employers in Merthyr had gone.
A lot of former miners that I've spoken to have said that there was plenty of coal in the pit. It could have been mined and making a profit.
Yeah.
Was that the same in Merthyr Vale?
I think there was a lot of coal in Merthyr Vale. There was a lot of money spent in Merthyr Vale before we closed it. They put new washeries in there. We put a new lamp room in. We put new offices for managers. I think going back, somebody said we spent something like £1 million in Myrtle Colby, and then he said, it's uneconomic.
With their bare hands in the village that had drowned on dry land, in a village that had drowned on dry land, by luck and by chance.
Mardy is situated at the head of the Rhondda Fach. Famous for its coal production worldwide, it was the last pit to raise a coal dram in the Rhondda Valley. I'm driving back to Mardy 30 years on to see how things have changed. Here we are, this is it. I'm overlooking the village of Mardy, and it's a March day. It's cold, it's misty, and it's raining. I can see the wind turbines in the distance on the hillside, and I also see the scars of the coal industry with the old coal tips and the scrambler bike tracks on them. And you can see the old colliery site of the last pit in the Rhondda Valley, which is now derelict and has been since they demolished it. I photographed Glynis back in 1984. She was a miner's wife and a strong supporter of the fight against pit closures.
So that's the same camera as you used 30 years ago, is it?
No, no. I've still got it.
We were all very upset. We didn't know, nobody wanted to go back really. And when we got up to Margie Colliery, to the roundabout in front of the colliery, all the boys, all the men stood on the side of the road and clapped all the women through, and I think that was something then that devastated everybody. And I gave my last speech on the roof of the colliery. Yeah. It was a devastating day. We were all crying. All crying. Looking back now in retrospect, we were never going to win. We were never going to win. But, you know, we did try. And, you know, and I've got no love for Scargill now. We'd have probably followed him to the ends of the earth then. And I think Scargill lost us the strike because there was no negotiation with him. It was black and white, and it was personal. It was a personal issue, him and Thatcher.
Do you have any regrets about being part of the strike, Glynis?
I'm glad I did it. I'm seriously glad I did it because I made some wonderful friends. Went to places I would have never gone. I'd have never sat around in my tiny little house with people from South Africa and Chile. Refugees from Chile. So that, for me, was my education. And I probably would do it again, you know. But I think we would be wiser this time. I think we would certainly not follow Scargill.
Mardy was known as Little Moscow because of its trade unionism and its strength to fight. And there weren't any pickets at Mardy Colliery throughout the year-long strike because not one miner would attempt to ever go back. They were that solid. So that's credit to them. And I think that builds this community. That's what this community is really all about. So I've just walked from the village, and it's about a quarter of a mile up to the old colliery site. And I remember before the strike, I took photographs at this pit. And you see the sign, it was blue and yellow, NCB sign, and it said Mardy Colliery, South Wales area. I remember in my photographs when the miners used to come up in the cage from this colliery, all the collieries, and they always smiled. They always laughed and smiled when they saw the camera, and made some quirky comments. Yeah, it was always good fun to take photos of them. It was a privilege for me to be able to do that. Roy had come from a family of coal miners but ended the tradition when Mardy Colliery closed.
I am the sixth and the last generation of miners. My father died of pneumoconiosis. He worked with some men that were characters, which, oh, how can I... if it wasn't for people like some of the people I worked with, perhaps nobody would have gone there then. Oh, they were characters. Under appalling conditions. I became active in the strike picketed in different parts of the country. I went to Orgrave and I was one of the drivers. When we had a roll call towards the end of the day, one of the boys was missing. So I went to the police officer and asked, where do you take boys that's been arrested? And he told me in Rotherham. So I'd never been to Rotherham before, so I was lost. And I was wandered around the back of this huge police station. And when I was there, a single-decker bus pulled up and the door was open. And when I looked, the seats had been removed and there was all little cages inside, and the bus was full of men that were in these cages. Some were unconscious, they'd wet themselves. There was blood running down the aisle through head injuries. The driver was shouting abuse at me, but he couldn't shut the door. There was something wrong with the door, and he kept on blowing the horn to open the electric gates of the police station. I was dumbfounded. It's something like you see in South Africa. And this is 30 years ago.
Let's get in here out of the rain. Oh. Oh.
I photographed Trevor Morgan back in 1983 while he was waiting to go underground to begin his afternoon shift at Mardy Colliery.
Smokey, Mike, good God, another one. The electrician he was.
Yeah.
Nodder. I don't know why they call it that.
Well, it's like you were saying earlier, they all had nicknames.
All nicknames, the first time I went down in Mardy, it was a bit of an experience, as you could imagine. Never seen anything like it before or since. Little Moscows it now and then, in the days when a lot of it was communism, you know. But they were fighting for, not just for jobs, but they were fighting for life. I mean, there was nothing in Mardy.
I remember coming to Mardy, Trev, during the miners' strike, and everybody seemed to be very politically aware.
It was a very renowned place for politics, Mardy. That's where the name came about, Little Moscow, because they were very ardent supporters of people and the community. They weren't particularly, I don't think they were particularly communists as such. You know, they weren't Marxists or anything. They were just, they thought it was a better way and a better way of life. It suited the common people, you know, that everybody could share in everything, rather than, this is why the Miners' Institutes came about.
What do you remember about the miners' strike?
It was absolutely rock solid. I mean, we didn't have pickets, there was no need for them. Nobody would have dreamt of going up there, let alone breaking the strike. But it was hard for everybody.
On my way home to the village of Ystrgynlais in the Swansea Valley, where I live now, I arranged to meet Sian James MP. She was a young miner's wife, and her story has recently been portrayed in the film Pride.
And I said, what's that? He said, crispy Findus pancakes or beans on toast.
Oh, I love beans on toast. You married a miner. You went through the strike, you were fairly young. You were my age, basically, we were the same age.
Yeah.
What was your feelings about the strike when it started?
In 1984, we were very bitter in South Wales. I know we were bitter in our house. You know, we'd seen collieries closed, Wyndham Western, we'd seen collieries closed, Bryn Lliw, etc. So we knew what it meant, you know, when you closed a colliery. And our motto was, you know, Cied Pwll, Lladd, Cymuned, shut the pit and you kill a community. And we certainly had seen that across the valleys then. We weren't fighting over more pay. We weren't fighting for a shorter working week. What we were fighting for was to retain good quality jobs in our communities which paid well. And I remember the first day of the strike, you know, when we were actually on strike, that there'd been a vote and my husband's colliery had voted Abernant to carry on working. But then they were picketed out. And my husband had said, well, I'll do anything for you. He said, but I'm not crossing a picket line. That's the end of it, you know. You can ask me for anything. But it never crossed my mind to ask him to do that because I've been brought up in a trade union household. You know, I remember going down to the local Santi's, you know, cafe, Italian cafe, and sitting there with all the old boys who used to sit there, all the retired miners, and it was like, oh, 6 weeks, and the miners will have seen Maggie off. And that's what had happened in 72, and that's what had happened in 74. So we had absolutely no reason to think that it was going to be different. And really, we should have seen that it was going to be different.
On the 5th of March 1985, the miners returned to work. Mr. Scargill refused to accept defeat and urged his men to hold their heads up high, and he promised that the struggle against pit closures would continue. But the speech of Tory Minister David Hunt echoed in the mining communities when he said that striking miners would be walking into an industrial graveyard.
Dirty hole. He made the most of meager means, but gave his children brighter dreams than that deep dark dirty hole.
A lot of the working class here were working in the pits. They didn't need to go out to the village to get jobs. It was here for us, and that is gone. And when I look at Newbridge now, I think it's a sad place.
And she knew that when she defeated the two biggest powers, which was the steel workers and the miners, there was nobody else going to stand in their way.
Well, there was a lot of talk at the time that the community would die, but we have survived. We've taken on different roles. It shows that we could do it. But it wasn't easy, it was difficult. And all around us is still memories of when this place was known for its coal.
She was out to ruin the mine workers, and that was the end of it. I mean, most of the pits that were left in those days were all making a profit, albeit small, but they employed them. We were 262 men still in Mardy when we finished. They were all earning a living, spending their money in the community and supporting the community and paying their taxes. Now they were put on the dole, or most of them anyway.
We had miners whose marriages broke up because of the strike. They were away picketing, and then they had wives that didn't support the strike and felt that they were being penalised because their husband should have been at work, and it must have caused hell in homes, you know. Definitely must have. Nobody will ever realise the full extent of the damage it caused to people's lives. And yet, for me, and it seems contrary to say it, it was an experience I wouldn't have missed.
As my journey reaches its conclusion, I personally feel sadness. Sad that the pits are no longer there, but to meet some of the people I originally photographed in the 1980s has been a real high point in my life. I've had the privilege to photograph them once again. I hope the photographs will be a long-lasting memory of the coal mining valleys of South Wales and the people who took part in the 1984-85 miners' strike.
Don't you ever look down that deep, dark, dirty hole.